All right, Brandon, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff.
So I wanted to have a chat. We've had a lot of activity lately, particularly in the Bitcoin space and particularly in America with a bunch of legal action that has come down. Something that I have been following closely, but I'm not like a real hardcore keen user, has to do with Samourai wallet. I've been using Samourai wallet, let's say, for over a year now, but I haven't necessarily dug into all the more advanced features of it. And, you know, one of the features of Samourai wallet is that it offers a mixing service. It offers some native coin join that they managed to do in there. And so this helps to enable people to have privacy. And, you know, all things seemed well until the two founders of Samourai were arrested. And so I want to name them here, Keon Rodriguez and William Hill. So they've both been arrested and are in custody right now, one in Pennsylvania and I believe the other one in Portugal. Mm-hmm. And they've been charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering and also conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmission business. And essentially, these guys are developers. They made a product for Bitcoin. Like I said, it involves some mixing service. And now they find themselves facing trial. They find themselves being held. So maybe to start us off, you could give us a little primer on what you know about Samourai and how do you describe what a mixing service is and what that does?
Sure. So Samourai wallet was specifically a privacy-focused wallet. It's been around for a little while now, and it offered actually a wide range of privacy tools. That was the focus of the wallet, and so they had things like CoinJoin, which is one of the things that was specifically named in the indictment that they were arrested for. Another one, Ricochet, is another tool that was named in the indictment. And there's a number of others as well. The mixing service is actually important sort of language distinction here in terms of what Samourai is doing with Whirlpool, which is their CoinJoin service, and what traditionally people have gotten in trouble for mixing services in the past. Early on in Bitcoin's history and forever in other cryptocurrencies, people have offered mixing services, specifically with that language where previous criminal actions and arrests have occurred in situations where you would send your Bitcoin or cryptocurrency to someone. They would take custody of it and they would send you someone else's Bitcoin back. That's a traditional custodial mixing service. And, FinCEN, the sort of primary financial regulator for things like this in the U.S., had made a clear distinction for over a decade that kind of service was illegal, and specifically that services that don't take custody of customers' funds were in a different category. And Samourai...
So just on that point about it being a service for this mixer you're talking about, when I send them my funds, it's out of my control, and I'm just hopeful that they're going to be returned.
That's right. Yeah. So that's again, early on, that those services were around in the early days of Bitcoin, and those were the places. Bitcoin Fog is a relatively recent action that occurred in that kind of service where you're just sending your Bitcoin to another party and you're hoping to get that in return. Samourai's Whirlpool worked very differently, and it worked differently specifically around this idea of custody. Samourai's Whirlpool was a service that effectively acted as a message transmitter. It allowed individual users who were entering the service to coordinate a single transaction with each other. That transaction ultimately, when a user of that service agreed to be a party of the transaction, they were sending money to themselves. So they were signing a transaction, the ultimate result of which the money would return to you. However, it was one transaction where multiple people sign that transaction and the money returned back to the previous owner. So Samurai's service effectively was a way by which multiple people could communicate, their wallet could communicate with each other, with each other's wallets, coordinate the creation of a transaction by which they agree that this is what it looks like. I'm sending this much money and I'm getting this much money back. And ultimately, the people in control of that transaction are the users or owners of the Bitcoin in the first place.
Do you think that this distinction of like sending money back to yourself, can you maybe explain that? Perhaps that has to do with how the UTXO system works. Do you think that that is part of the problem because it's not understood?
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot here that there's a lot of square pegs being fitted around holes here. The UTXO model, is very different from the way that we all understand money to work today, right? It's typically we have an account in a database somewhere in a bank, and that account has a balance, but you don't have the same structures in place. Bitcoin's UTXO model is a lot more like carrying bills around in your wallet, where you have individual pieces of Bitcoin, and those UTXOs have different values associated with them. And when you spend them, those UTXOs are destroyed and new ones are created. And this model is very, alien in terms of the way that regulation is constructed. And it's all constructed around the traditional financial system, and it just works very differently. It's certainly part of the confusion.
This square peg round hole thing, it comes up all the time in cryptocurrency, right? And not just this point about privacy. The point there about like coordination, right? It could, like in your eyes, could this still be seen as nefarious?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to sort of boil down what they've been charged with a little bit, because there's two parts to this. You mentioned both of the charges. One is the operation of a unlicensed money transmission business, and the other one is conspiracy to commit money laundering. There's privacy tools in general. In the history of privacy tools, certainly have the capability of being used for nefarious action, and no doubt there were people laundering money through Samurai's Whirlpool service. In the indictment itself, they named $2 billion, I think, in explicit or illicit funds that were crossing the platform, and that amounts to, say, I think it was 3.5% of the total volume of Samurai's Whirlpool.
Yep.
Certainly there were bad actors using the platform. The question is whether or not, in the case of the conspiracy to commit money laundering, whether they, were a party to that money laundering or not. And fundamentally, that's, the guidance that they followed, the guidance they understood from FinCEN's guidance for the last decade was that a non-custodial service operated in a different category. They thought that they were in a position, having not actually controlled any of the money in the first place, that they were in a position that they wouldn't be held liable for criminal action on their platform. But the facts and circumstances of this particular case may end up that they can't, outrun that money laundering charge. They did have an attitude about them. They had an attitude that was irreverent and specifically, they weren't necessarily, outwardly inviting money laundering and celebrating it, but they were controversial, and their attitudes probably didn't help them in this regard. The other charge, though, about operating an unlicensed money transmission service is a completely separate matter, and frankly, for the purposes of impact on the ecosystem, is probably more damaging and probably worth watching a little bit closer, because that categorization is a new one. a new position for the government to take, and has a lot of impact on the way we describe the way cryptocurrency services broadly are categorized, and how the people creating any tool think about themselves and their relationship with the law.
Yeah, it seems like being charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering. This means that potentially there is some evidence somewhere that's going to link these guys to this. To me, it seems like that could be any business operator, any citizen at any time, and doesn't necessarily have to do with cryptocurrency. Perhaps the crypto part of it attracts a different subset of money launderers. But yeah, the other part about operating a money transmission business, a lot of the commentary right now is centering around this FinCEN guidance, guidance in quotes. So FinCEN has produced guidance going back as early as 2014 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And from then, they make it very clear that if you're a non-custodial service, then essentially, this stuff is not in your control, and that opens the door for developers, for innovators to come in and say, okay, well, as long as we're not actually taking control of these coins, then we don't have to play by the same rules as the money service businesses. And I guess if we look at all that's happened in the last decade, there's been a lot of activity, and this is kind of like retroactively going back and changing the rules.
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I saw someone commenting the other day about how a lawyer might advise their client in a situation like this now, right? Where you have this long-standing guidance that sort of provides some frameworks you can operate in, how you understand, how you relate to the existing regulatory regime, and that guidance would be what you'd use to provide advice to your clients. Except you have to caveat that with, can't promise you won't go to prison, because
right.
The enforcement action seems to be the way in which the DOJ has chosen to create change. Instead of any other guidance, any other and guidance is such a terrible way of looking at this. We have to live in a world where a PDF published on a Friday afternoon by a regulatory agency is all we have to go by. There's no laws specifically surrounding these situations. There's no, all we have is what stands from the advice or opinion of a regulator on that day. And it seems as though these recent actions are a clear signal. Obviously, it's not just the Samourai case. So on the same day, the DOJ produced a response to a motion in the Tornado Cash case, making the same claims about their position as a money transmission business. We had a letter from Elizabeth Warren. We had a number of things all happening at the same time that sort of signaled a position change. It's a difficult world to live in when the ground can shift under you like that without a real law being passed. And it's one of the challenges of operating in this industry, obviously.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it there, with the ground shifting underneath you. You sent me this article posted on Coin Center, and Coin Center has been sort of advocating for, legal regulation use of cryptocurrency and sort of giving folks the choice of how they transact. Part of the argument in there has to do with this Tornado Cash response as well. Are you familiar with Tornado Cash? Can you give us a quick primer?
I'm a lot less familiar with Tornado Cash than I am with Samourai, but it's pretty similar in terms of construction. Similar in that it's a non-custodial service that provides good capability for people to gain anonymity on their Ethereum, and I think there is one major difference. I believe that the Tornado Cash system operated largely in a separate capacity from the. It wasn't like Samourai in the sense that Samourai was a business running this service and charging fees to suit. But very similar, operating on the Ethereum network in a non-custodial manner to provide privacy on funds.
Yeah. So if Samourai is operating as a business, what's their business model there? Like, I guess the obvious one is like you said, they were a little bit cheeky with their online presence. Are they advertising for people to come use the service that way?
Yeah. Their business model was that in return for operating this service, where they let users use their central servers to communicate with each other and construct transactions. Part of that transaction that was constructed left them a fee for the service. So it had different models. You could mix, you could coin join anything from, early on it was 5,000 Satoshis up to half a Bitcoin in size. And the fee model structure was different among those different groups or sizes of transactions. And so as part of this coordination or creation of the transaction, they were left with a little bit of the fee on top. So their business model was effectively asking for a fee in return for the service of providing this coordination.
I mean, just sort of going over the details with you now, right? It seems like such obvious, innocent behavior. Maybe not completely innocent, but it seems like this is what businesses do. You create a service, people want to use your service, and you pull a fee for doing so. And and the people here, right? It was 3.5% of potential money laundering. The people here are the 96.5% of people that are like, oh, let's try to unlink my past history in Bitcoin from these next few transactions.
Yeah, I mean that's an important point to make, right? Okay, so I know we're sort of going to get generally onto the topic of privacy, but I used Whirlpool. I used it not because I'm hiding anything, but because I know how Bitcoin works, right? We all live in a world right now where we're used to some level of privacy with our financial institutions. It's not great, right? Your bank, your brokers, whomever you're interacting with, you're providing information to them. They know everything about you. They could and do report on those transactions to authorities, and so your privacy is not perfect. But what you get out of that situation is, your communication with them is direct, right? You're not doing this in the open. You're not walking around with a bullhorn when you're speaking to your financial providers. Bitcoin's different. It's a public ledger, and every transaction is completely public. Particularly if we're in a situation where the people you're interacting with or the entities you're interacting with have your name, your address, your date of birth, and everything like that. Everything from there can be traced on the blockchain. So quite literally, you can have a situation where, your employer who's paying your salary in Bitcoin can watch that next transaction and see where you're spending the money the next day. The coffee shop that you go spend your Bitcoin at can see how much money you make. And so privacy on the base layer in Bitcoin is simply not great. There's that idea of, that it's not really attached to your name on the blockchain. You don't have, it's pseudonymous in that way, but the reality of this is that it's something that can be traced and followed. So I used it because I understood that, and I knew that if I wanted to be able to spend my Bitcoin semi-privately in a way that the baker doesn't know how much Bitcoin I have, I needed to provide myself some level of privacy. And that's a valuable service to me, and I was willing to pay the fee for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about from the beginning, as you mentioned, the mixing as a service or even non-custodial. It's been in the works for a long time, and I'm thinking about I teach this stuff to students at university, and one of the books I use is like Mastering Bitcoin by Antonopoulos, right? He was working on it in like 2014. I'm not sure exactly what the publication year was. And, there's a section on mixing, and there's like the diagram about the UTXO model and mixing. And, maybe back then it was a little bit more niche and Bitcoin was still a lot more pseudonymous just because there were fewer eyes on the blockchain. But I think nowadays it's very well known that that term I think is even outdated, right? Due to the analytics that is happening with all of the transactions that are logged in Bitcoin. And the part that I'm thinking about is like sort of like squaring that circle about teaching students about privacy, and then like, oh, by the way, if you're learning this or if you're doing this and you're in America or you're using this tool, then potentially it's illegal.
Yeah, it's, again, for me personally, like, I guess one of the things I'm looking forward to is what comes next, right? One of the great things about the Bitcoin space broadly is that these are values that are held dear. And I think in addition to that, the folks that like work in Bitcoin understand these problems. They know that like, if we're going to have a situation where you can freely use Bitcoin without this level of knowledge being, broadly distributed about your transactions, we're going to have some way of providing privacy to users.
This is exactly what Snowden in a recent tweet said, right? So on the topic of Bitcoin privacy, he said like Bitcoin devs have had 10 years to try to work this out, and the time is now, almost like a now or never. So I guess maybe there's two ways, or there's a number of ways this could play out. But the bad way, the dark way, is that privacy never improves on Bitcoin, either through main layer, either through base layer Bitcoin, or potentially through second layer Bitcoin as well. I won't say would you agree with that. The other side of it, so we've got like Snowden ringing the bell saying, hey, we need to do something right now. On the other side of it, I'll cite one example, is Adam Back. He said like everybody needs to calm down. This is just how the lawyers work, and it's business as usual, and essentially it will blow over. And so he's sort of requesting that we don't make too much of a fuss about it. So like, I guess maybe like, what's your view of how this plays out? Like we've got, if we take two extremes, where obviously we know Snowden's view is that any reach is overreach by the government, and apparently Adam Back just wants things to continue ticking along as they are. Where do you sit?
I sit in the camp of I think this is going to be all right in the end. I think ultimately, what Bitcoin needs to do is survive and keep moving forward. This will slow things down. Obviously, there's been a chilling effect, right? We've had a number of wallets exit the US. We've had the competing CoinJoin service has closed its doors entirely. And so there's been been a good bit of regression coming out of this in terms of the tools that are available, particularly to Americans, but also broadly in terms of privacy. So it's not something we should take lightly. It's something we should be concerned about and move forward with. But I think, as with everything in Bitcoin, recently, months ago, we had a big fuss around the fees on the main chain, creating issues not just with transacting on chain, but also in Lightning, and how that plays out in the long run. And that's created a pressure by which people are focused on looking forward at the future and trying to create solutions to solve that problem. I think the same thing exists here. If Bitcoin's going to be a medium of exchange, it's going to have to solve this problem in one way or another. We're lucky that Lightning provides some level of baseline privacy, at least for people sending money on Lightning. Even in a custodial situation, you have at least the same level of privacy you have. I mentioned before, like Bitcoin in terms of privacy is, these days with KYC, it's arguably worse than traditional finance, specifically around privacy. But the Lightning Network brings that back, at least to a level playing field in the current environment. And I expect that we'll see more things coming through. If we get clear, clear evidence that this isn't going to work, this isn't going to carry forward. This being, the existing privacy tools. The next round might solve that problem for us, and the pressure we're seeing today will hopefully bring us there.
I'm just getting an internet connection notification here. I think that looks all right. Sorry.
That's all right.
So in terms of something changing, you're talking on the privacy piece or the fees piece? Right now we're talking privacy, but
yeah. So specifically, I was talking about the privacy piece.
Yep.
I was using the fees thing as an analogy, like that. Just simply, the pressure of there's so many people in the Bitcoin ecosystem that want to see this exist, and exist has multiple forms. Like, exist in an ETF where the price goes up is one thing that people are happy about, and that's not why I'm here. I'm here because this is a better money that I think the world can use, and in order for us to use it as a medium of exchange, this is a pressure we're going to have to release. It's one that we're going to have to overcome. So, these indictments, these forces that are, creating pressure and will also create change. And I think we'll see, either that these tools win and we get a clear signal that we can move forward with the tools that we have, or they don't and we create something else. But ultimately, for Bitcoin to exist as a medium of exchange, this is something we'll need. I think it's important framing around this privacy thing to think about like the history of Adam Back lived this history with the cypherpunks and the battles they fought over encryption in the 90s, and how that relates to what we have today. Without that battle being fought, we wouldn't have any encryption on our communications in the internet. We wouldn't have, a secure connection between yourself and your bank when you're doing online banking. All your communication in that realm would have been in clear text, and you wouldn't be able to have that service in reality. And we're lucky that, they won that battle on free speech grounds. And we do have the tools that we have today, and we have the ability to connect to our bank and not have that leak information to the world. Those same battles are going to end up being fought, whether they win in this case or we find another way to provide that level of privacy with Bitcoin transactions. Ultimately, that's going to be the same battleground, and we'll find something that, just as with public-private key cryptography, something that can't be censored. So that's ultimately what we're going to need. So I'm in the middle. I think we should be concerned about this. But Adam Back is right, when he mentions that when you read these indictments and these arguments, they're pretty silly. Silly in two ways. Some of the time when they're making these arguments, they're clearly claiming things that are factually incorrect. Giving examples of, money transmission that clearly are not money transmission, and using analogies like frying pans transmitting heat, which fundamentally means on the internet that every service passing data, and a bunch of jokes came out about USB cables and frying pans and different things like that when they were making.
It's comical. You're right. It's silly.
It's a joke because your ISP, a VPN provider, quite literally everyone that's touching this data is providing a very similar service. They're passing messages between two parties, right? And if that service is a money transmission business, then we are all money transmission businesses. And it's simply like it's a bit absurd, but that's fundamentally how we won the crypto battle in the 90s. It was like, this is absurd. This is speech. It can't be regulated. And that's fundamentally how we're going to, how we'll win this one going forward as well.
So would you say you're optimistic?
I am, yeah. Like I said, I think I'm not one of these people that thinks like Bitcoin is inevitable and we should just like wait it out and, a decade from now it'll all be fine. I think if you care about this, you should look for ways in which we can make this happen. But I also think that really what we need to do is again, Bitcoin needs to survive. It needs to go on to the next day. And, you know, because we're writing code here, it's going to be okay in the end. I think I will give it. Yeah.
Like, can this free speech, this code as free speech thing continue to hold up then, even if code as free speech allows money laundering?
I mean, no. I mean, look, there's a chance it doesn't, right? I think
it's a tough question, right? Predict the future for us.
We should all be thankful that it worked in the first round. I mean, this is an ongoing battle. That's, you know, we just had I see this all as a continuation of the same fight, right? I mentioned the crypto battle in the 90s. We also had, you know, backdoors to end-to-end encryption. We had a big fight in the UK just recently around that. You know, every step along the way, people's ability to act in a private manner has been, you know, under attack. And so far, that has gone well for us. I can't say for sure it's always going to be that way. I hope that it is, but yeah, so far history has proven that, you know, privacy has been a protected right to date, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that continues to be the case.
Let's talk about privacy transitioning from base layer Bitcoin to layer 2 Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a distinction between Bitcoin layer 1 or particularly what's happening in Lightning that allows, as you mentioned earlier, privacy to at least come back a little bit to level ground?
Yep. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Lightning Network does provide a baseline level of privacy that is higher than on-chain Bitcoin. And the reason that it can accomplish that is simply that, I guess first, like just a quick overview on Lightning Network. Essentially what we're talking about is batch transactions on on-chain Bitcoin. So the Lightning Network is an agreement between two parties who trade transaction information between each other and agree on a balance. They can trade that transaction information back and forth over and over again, and then ultimately create a transaction on-chain. When these two parties are connected to each other, they can continue to do that. They are also each connected to other parties in the network, and that allows us to send transactions from one party to a distant place on the Lightning Network. And that's a simple explanation of the Lightning Network. The reason that it has a higher base level of privacy is because in order to conduct the routing on the Lightning Network, it uses what's called onion routing. Ultimately, when we are asking for money on the Lightning Network, we create an invoice. That invoice is paid. The two parties find the right route to get it to the destination. But in order for that to occur, the sender needs to know the destination, or at least an approximation of the destination. That without getting into too much depth.
Okay.
There's a little bit of gray area there, but in simple terms, the person creating the invoice says, "Send money here." The person sending the money simply sends money to that destination, but they may not be connected to that ultimate recipient. So they send it to a party who might be able to connect to that recipient, and so on and so forth. So the sender will ultimately know where it's going, but the receiver doesn't know where it came from.
This is kind of how mail used to work. You just put the name of Tom in the town.
That's exactly right.
And then they try to find him.
In addition to that, if you had a P.O. box instead of your home address, you could theoretically send it to a P.O. box or some other place, and Tom could ultimately get the mail. It's a pretty good analogy in terms of how it works. So the sender will know some information about where to send the funds, and then ultimately the receiver can receive it on the other side. So the Lightning Network provides, if you are, again, going back to my analogy about the Bitcoin network, both the people paying me, if the people paying me can see where I spend the money, and where the people who I'm spending the money with can see where my money came from. That's different on the Lightning Network. At the very least, as a sender, I can write an address. I can send it through the mail, and it will arrive at the destination, and the receiver doesn't necessarily know where it came from unless I've written my address on the top, right? So
you've got like these hops in between. Is that the onion part?
Yeah, so the onion part is that, so I mentioned that this is a series of bilateral agreements, right? So party A has an agreement with party B to C, and C to D. And when the receiver is saying, send it here, on the sender side, I'm reaching out to the parties that are connected to me and saying, I need to get a payment here. We figure out if I can get that payment to the destination. Once that route is understood, we create the ultimate transaction. And the onion routing essentially is that as the transaction passes from A to B to C to D, when A sends it to B, B looks at it and goes, okay, I need to send it to C, right? So they know it came from A, and they know they need to send it to C, but they don't know anything else after that. C looks at it and says, okay, B to D, and so they get a new piece of information. They know it needs to go to D. They don't even know that D is the ultimate recipient, but they do know it needs to go to D, right? And then D receives the funds, and then we get a confirmation back the other direction. So because of that onion messaging, ultimately the receiver has, a somewhat degraded level of privacy because along the path, people know the destination, but on the sender side, all the recipients know is that that all the parties know is it came from the person next to me in this chain. But ultimately, nobody knows where it came from or where it originated.
And these transactions aren't keeping track of where they came from and where they're going. There's no metadata attached to them.
Well, there's a lot
in terms of the history,
right? There's a lot of information, but no, beyond the two parties that you're attached to, and you're in the middle of a route. There's not a lot of information about ultimately where that's going.
Okay, and what about other layer 2s? In Ethereum, for example, they also have a ledger, and you can go to a block explorer and check them out. Lightning does not have this.
No, it does not. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about Lightning. So what you can see on the Lightning Network is you can see the number of public channels. Okay, so public channels are, I have a public IP address. I am broadcasting the fact that I have channels to the network. I want my presence known on the network. So those are the public nodes with public channels. There are a lot of infrastructure on the Lightning Network that are not public. They use what's called unannounced channels. And those channels are used in a slightly different way. But so there's a whole section of the network that's hiding itself from the rest of the network. So you can see the number of nodes, you can see the number of channels, and you can see the number of Bitcoin in the public channels. So you can see a graph of the public network, but there is a whole nother private network. I won't say it as though it's one private network. There's a whole series of private connections that are attached to that public network that are not seen. So there's quite a bit of complexity, and there's quite a bit of opacity around what's actually happening. When you are an outside observer and you're not part of an individual transaction, you cannot see it. There's no information, there's no public information about the number of transactions that are happening on the Lightning Network. That is all, your node sees what passes through it itself. And outside of that understanding, that local understanding of the world, you don't see a lot outside of what's happening on the network. And that's really how we get that increased level of privacy, is that what's happening on the network is ultimately hidden from most of the network. So we have whole businesses, chain analysis, and that are growing up around monitoring the Bitcoin blockchain and other blockchains because those public ledgers are completely visible and you can see every individual transaction. This is completely different. Now, some of them do offer a service for the Lightning Network, but just based strictly on how it works, outside of a very expensive like probing activity and trying to like, send money around and find out information about the Lightning Network.
Yep.
There's really not much you can do from it, from a public stance.
Maybe this leads into the charts that I sent you. So I just sent you a snapshot, and my question is like, what's happening with adoption in Lightning? Every now and then I check in on these charts. They show like total capacity, so how many Bitcoins are in these channels, and like how many nodes are accessible. And it seems like it's been flat or declining for a few years. So maybe you can either set me straight or comment on, where are we going with Lightning?
Sure. So brief versions, the Lightning Network's going great.
Yep.
I'll tell you what.
All right, we're done here. Thanks for coming out.
So one of the things about those charts, like, Lightning Network went through a big boom phase in terms of what you see on those node and capacity charts in 2021. And I was part of that boom phase. At one point, I was running 5 Lightning nodes through various means. On-chain fees were really low. I was running one for a BTC Pay server. I was running one at home. I was running one just for fun. I had this other little hobby tool that had its own node connected to it. I was opening nodes everywhere. And I think we were living in a bit of an immature phase in the Lightning Network and a bit of a silly reality, to be honest. And I stopped doing that. As soon as I started getting, the reality of the Lightning Network, hitting me in the face with closed channels and fees, I stopped doing that. I run one big node for myself, and we run one at LightningPay. And I take a lot of services off of that to do the things that I want to do. I think a lot of people found that running a Lightning node is not easy, and it's not. So that's clearly something that we should be aware of, is that running a sovereign, individual Lightning node with enough channels to be effective on the Lightning Network is not a simple task. You have to run a server. You have to have some level of maintenance of that. You have to do updates. You have to look at your liquidity on channels. It's not simple. And I think what we're seeing in those charts of nodes and capacity is a maturing of the Lightning Network. While the capacity has gone down, the number of transactions have gone up many orders of magnitude.
Okay.
So if you look at River, it has a really good research team. River.com, they're a U.S. exchange. They did a report on the Lightning Network where they used data from their own node, and they also collected information from other big nodes on the network that they were, friends with, I guess. They anonymized that data, and they produced a report for the last 2 years, 2022 and 2023, on the Lightning Network. And in 2023, they reported that from August 2021 to August 2023, during that time, the capacity on the Lightning Network has reduced. The total transactions that they could account for on the Lightning Network increased 1,200%. So the amount of activity on the Lightning Network has been increasing tremendously over time. And again, this is from their, a narrow range of the network that they could get data on. But my own experience has been the same. I use it. When I first created my node, it was kind of a ghost town, and these days it's a little bit different. And I use it personally, far more than I ever did. So I guess the important thing is, like, the Lightning Network has a way to batch Bitcoin transactions, right? And fundamentally, the measure of its success is the number of transactions it's taking off of the main chain. And that metric is not measurable publicly. So it's, I know that I'm sort of waving my hands and saying, like, it's hard to see this measurement, except in the case if you're River and you have a lot of big node friends, you can pull some data together. But I think that reflects mine.
That River data, presumably, if they come up with a transaction figure, that would be like a floor level.
based on what they have access to or can see or have tracked?
Yeah, so they when they did this, they were attempting to be pretty conservative, and again give a floor of what they can see on the network, and they had a 1,200% increase in the number of transactions they measured using their methodology.
And so, like when you say that you notice it too, does this mean that fees are coming down, or does this mean it's easier to find the recipients or something like this?
I would measure that two ways. So one way is, when I first created my nodes, there was payments failing all over the place. That was partly my own maturity and my ability to run my node, but it was also the maturity of the Lightning Network. There's been improvements in pathfinding algorithms. There have been improvements on just the general software and its performance. But I think the other thing is just that I'm using it more, and there's a lot more activity on my node, right? And so I have a local view of the Lightning Network, and there's just more and more activity every day, and there's I think from my own payments experience, I'm just a hobbyist running my own node, but I really don't have any payment failures anymore. And that's a nice place to be.
I like how you phrased that there. So you said, I'll say your words back to you. You said that success for the Lightning Network is removing transactions from base layer Bitcoin. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. So it's, what we're ultimately, so one thing to know about the Lightning Network, and this is where some of the recent, we've all sort of noticed a bit of an attitude shift where people were surprised when fees went up, things got hard for the Lightning Network, for some participants in the Lightning Network. And I think people got a little bit, upset about that. Ultimately the purpose of the Lightning Network is to increase transaction throughput. So among participants on the Bitcoin network, based on the block size and based on the difficulty adjustments, there's a bandwidth limit on the number of transactions that can actually occur on the Bitcoin blockchain. The success of the Lightning Network is the extent to which that number increases, right? The number of transactions that we can actually put through the Bitcoin blockchain. And again, that's, if you look at that same River report, I think it went from 2021, that being a really small number. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was something like 5%. It had grown the amount of transaction volume and value had increased 4 or 5 times over that same time period. So again, by that measure, we're succeeding.
I guess there should be some multiplier effect too, right? If Lightning Network, as you say, you don't get these failed transactions and privacy is good and fees are good, then not only is that removing transactions, but that's going to increase Lightning only adoption.
Yeah, I mean, I'm focused on the Lightning Network in terms of where people go to in the end. I mean, the way that I think about the evolution of Bitcoin in general is that if it's successful, the Bitcoin blockchain is going to be difficult to interact with for most entities. It's going to be difficult.
Tell us what does difficult mean?
Difficult means that it's a scarce resource. 7 transactions per second. If there's demand for Bitcoin to be used as a medium of exchange, there will be more than 7 transactions per second. And that means that fees will go up to accommodate that demand. And they should go up to a degree that eventually I personally don't expect I will be using the base chain very often. I expect that the next wave of people coming on board will use it less than I did, and the next wave after that will use it less than they do. And fundamentally, there needs to be a different way of interacting with Bitcoin. And I think the Lightning Network today is the most obvious and nearest term choice for that. So, in the work we're doing at Lightning Pay, we're focused on the Lightning Network because right now it seems like that's the destination. As people are onboarding and they're buying their first, $50 in Bitcoin, there were periods over the last year where it would have been impossible for you to take self-custody of $50 in Bitcoin without losing all of it. And I expect that as demand increases for Bitcoin, that will be a more regular occurrence. So people's interaction with Bitcoin will be more and more pushed to second layers, like the Lightning Network. And again, its success being a measure of how much we can abstract transactions from the base chain. That's where I expect most of the interaction will be.
Can I still be a Bitcoiner if I only have Lightning channel interaction?
Sure, you can. I know that that's a bit of a hard place to be. Is a bit like if you have a. Now, I came to Bitcoin really caring about separating money from people in control of money, like having a money that was that had no one in control and sort of was provided financial freedom in a way that we haven't really seen in the world was what brought me to that. And I own my own keys, and I realized that people's ability to hold their own keys going forward, it's important to me. I realize that most of the growth of the Lightning Network these days is in the custodial service where you're not holding your own keys. Can you still be a Bitcoiner? Yeah, I guess we won't go into defining that too much, but I think, look, I've come to terms with where this is going. And I've come to terms with it because I believe the destination is still better than what we have today. But I do think that we don't know we have a lot of ideas about what might come to change this situation and make it better for the individual holder. People holding their own keys and the capacity to be sovereign. But even if we don't have that, there are solutions now. I'm really excited about eCash. I'm really excited about some of the other technologies to provide, a level of privacy and a level of, some level of custody over an asset. And I think it's something we want to protect and something we want to strive for. Just as with the fees conversation, the privacy conversation, pressure around, censorship resistance will drive new solutions as well. So I think the current state is that most people are using it custodially. And I expect we'll have new solutions, and almost no doubt we'll have new solutions going forward that improve that situation. But I think ultimately what I think people will do is they'll stack to a Lightning wallet until they can mint themselves a nice shiny UTXO and hold their keys, hold their savings for the long term. And that's okay, if that's what the demand for the Bitcoin network plays out, where you save your money until you can have that specific kind of sovereignty. That's what we'll look out for.
Earlier, you mentioned that you're running a Lightning node as a hobbyist, but this isn't entirely true, is it? So can you tell us about Lightning Pay? Lightning Pay recently launched, and what's the go there? What can I do with Lightning Pay?
Sure. So yes, I do run it as a hobbyist. I've been doing that for a few years. But yeah, we've been doing it professionally for a little while now. So Lightning Pay is a company that I co-founded with friends of mine, Rob Clarkson, Simon Collins, and we are attempting to connect New Zealand to the Lightning Network. The whole concept of Lightning Pay started because we were looking out for how we are able to use Bitcoin in New Zealand. We're all already saving in Bitcoin, and we all wanted to be able to use it. We wanted to be able to use it as money, as a medium of exchange. And one of the challenges that we have here is that the interaction with the Lightning Network specifically isn't native. When you go and interact with exchanges, that we have access to in New Zealand, There is one out of Australia that recently had issues with its New Zealand banking system that you can connect to the Lightning Network. Otherwise, you have to interact on chain. And so looking around at how we were going to solve this problem of sort of allowing or finding a way to get us to be able to spend money in New Zealand, we needed to have the Lightning Network available. And so we went out and we created a way to interact with New Zealand dollars in the Lightning Network as a first order of course. But ultimately what we want to achieve is we want to create a New Zealand specific payments layer using the Lightning Network technology that reduces fees, gives people instant settlement, and provides a lot of advantages that we need here. In New Zealand, we have among the highest fees in the Western world for our day-to-day transactions with credit cards and PayWave and e-commerce. When we do make those transactions, merchants receive those days and those funds in 5 to 10 days, and recognizing that we can do better with the tools we have on the Lightning Network. That's what we're working on. So we first created a very simple way to transact New Zealand dollars to Bitcoin on the Lightning Network. And now we're beginning to work on merchant solutions to allow merchants to accept payments in Bitcoin and optionally receive New Zealand dollars or receive that Bitcoin to their own wallet. So our service is completely non-custodial. And we are ultimately looking for ways in which we can leverage the Lightning Network to make the payments experience in New Zealand better.
And so would you consider you're in the payment space or the crypto Bitcoin space, or is it just a nice merger?
Look, we set out to, as I said, the sort of origin stories, we set out to find ways to make it easier for merchants to accept Bitcoin payments. We had to create the New Zealand dollar to Lightning Bitcoin part of the business in order to facilitate that. And so far, that's been an exciting product people are pretty happy with. It's really simple and
so that's novel. First in NZ.
Yep. There are ways you can do that elsewhere, and that's fundamentally like why we had to do it. It's because it didn't exist here. There wasn't a way to get your New Zealand dollars directly there. Our focus is on payments. So we're first looking at merchants and business interactions. But ultimately we know that in order for that to work, people need to be onboarded to the Lightning Network too. So people need to be able to get access to Lightning Network Bitcoin in order to spend it at our merchants, and both parties can get a better payments experience. So we do know that both sides of this equation need to be worked on. But first and foremost, we're focused on the payment side of things at the moment, on the business services. But as we begin to build that out, we will be looking at how we encourage users or payers on that side to begin interacting with the Lightning Network too. But ultimately, we know we're not, when we were giving this story about what we're trying to do, someone asked us, why are you even bothering with Bitcoin? And the answer is that, we are not going to be able to create tools for every conceivable, payments use case in New Zealand. We have access to an open source global monetary network that we're building on, and we hope that other people do the same thing. And we can work together to create this better payments experience in New Zealand. But we'll focus on merchants to start, and we'll do what we need to do next to help grow that ecosystem.
If I'm a merchant, do you have like a target that you can sell me? Like if I'm paying, I don't know what the number is, 2% in fees that just comes right off my bottom line, what's your target, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, our target is 0. So we set out sort of knowing we were going to end up building merchant payment solutions, trying to make it easy for people to accept Bitcoin payments. In order to do that, we had to create this exchange business. And the way that our business model works, if we can grow the ecosystem of people using the Lightning Network, we will ultimately, make our money off of that exchange. People onboarding onto the Lightning Network, we'll charge fees for that. But for merchants, our goal is to provide 0 fees. So when you're asking for 10 New Zealand dollars, you're going to get 10 New Zealand dollars in the bank account the next day. And you'll get it the next day. You won't get it 10 days later. You won't get chargebacks. So all the payments in the Light Network are final. You'll have to negotiate with the merchant if you want a refund.
Yeah. That's a good point I hadn't thought of.
And so those 3 things are things that are pain points for every payment on the legacy network. And it's something that we think is an obvious value proposition for merchants. Ultimately, like I said, our goal is to grow the Lightning ecosystem in New Zealand. By being able to run this exchange, we can offer this service to merchants, which ultimately, just the way our business model works, saves us money. So we can grow by asking for fees on the exchange part of the business and offer this service to merchants, which benefits everyone who's onboarding here.
All right. Well, I hope you can keep that up, and I wish you all the best. I've used your service to buy and both sell some sats, and have been pretty impressed so far.
Happy to hear it.
Few quick rapid fire questions before we wrap up here.
Let's do it.
One you already answered. I asked you if you're optimistic about this, and I think it's very clear that you're excited and optimistic. What's your favorite place in New Zealand?
My favorite place in New Zealand. My favorite place in New Zealand is Piano Flat.
Tell me more.
It's on the Bucher River. There's a little campground there that enters the bush, and there's some nice walking tracks up there. I'm a fly fisherman, but also it's a beautiful place to go for a walk. Beautiful place to hang out with your family. We go there pretty often.
Your family can camp and you can go fishing.
Yes, that's correct.
Very nice. What's your favorite Lightning wallet?
My favorite Lightning wallet, it's a personal choice because I do run my own node, but I really like Zeus for myself because I can connect to my own nodes through Zeus. It also has a lot of other services and other wallet types that you can use with it. That also gives me a lot of fine-grained control and choice, which I'm really happy with. If I wasn't running my own node, though, I would choose Phoenix, unless I was an American, because I left the US. But Phoenix is a great trade-off in terms of self-custody, which is maintained with Phoenix, but approaching a really great user experience that only the custodial wallets have provided so far. So that'd be my second choice if I wasn't running my own node.
Yeah, I've had a look at Zeus, and the feature set is impressive. It goes well beyond my expertise, but that's like an indication that I can grow into it. I don't think I've looked at Phoenix. Is that the one you said?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Brandon, you've been in the space a long time. You've been into Bitcoin a long time. Can you tell us who Satoshi is?
I cannot tell you who Satoshi is, and I don't want to know. I joke around often lately that I hope it's Craig Wright, because that would be the most genius move ever, to disappear, show up again, and completely destroy your credibility, so no one will ever believe that you're Satoshi, and then exit the scene that way. So,
great. Thank you very much for coming in, Brandon.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us, folks. Look out for the next episode of the Blockchain New Zealand podcast, probably in the same spot you found this one. Cheers.